Getting caregivers is great, but if you can't retain them, then all of that work that was put in is now a waste. Hi, my name is Nick Bonitatibus, owner and founder of Digital Champions, and I'm so excited to welcome our guest, David Knack from ZingGage, to talk about how you can retain more caregivers using a proven system. David, welcome. Let's dive in. How can home care agency owners really start to leverage and utilize reward systems so that they can get better results with caregiver retention?
Well, first of all, Nick, thanks for having me. I talk to home care owners numerous times a day, and we always end up talking about turnover, retention, 90-day turnover. There's all these kinds of metrics that get tracked in like the Home Care Pulse benchmarking study. In my opinion, like lag measures, right? You get lead measures of like what's the stuff that is going in that will turn into results down the road. And then lag measures is what happened as a result of the stuff that we did. Whenever we talk about retention, that's a symptom of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem can sound really fluffy. That bigger problem is this idea of creating a culture in home care. I think another way to talk about this is turnover, challenges with retention is a symptom of a lack of engagement with your caregivers. And it's super hard to do culture well in home care. I talk to people who try to do like cookouts and in-person meetings, and they'll get like 15 or 20% of their caregivers to show up, and it's always that same 15 or 20%, and it's great for that group. But it is like you get your 80% of your caregivers who aren't going to show up to those in-person things, and you've still got to figure out how to make them feel like a valued part of a team and not like they're just out there on their own, totally unsupported in the field, which I find is often the case in home care. And so, the things that I hear that tell me that culture is such an important thing to have and generally is so anemic, is so lacking in a lot of home care agencies is, I'll talk to owners and they'll say, we got into this business for a personal reason because we care about providing these services to people, but also we want to create great jobs. And the thing that we don't like about our business has grown, we love that. But the thing that we don't like about where we are today is that our best caregivers hear from us the least because we've always got these fires that we've got to put out. We've always got call outs at the last minute that we've got to get filled. And so we've got these rock stars who are really consistent and we really appreciate them, but we know that they don't know how much we appreciate them because we just don't have time in the day to do all the stuff that has to happen for clients to have caregivers in their homes and for no call, no shows to not totally disrupt the business. We don't have enough time in the day after that to like reach out to the people that we love and tell them how important they are to the business. And the things that we hear from caregivers when we interview them is like, so often I only hear from my office if I've screwed something up or if they need a favor from me. And this kind of this gap between there's just no like water cooler moments. There's no opportunities to do, I call them like the oil change in the relationship. It's that preventative maintenance that makes people feel like they're on the same page, like they're part of a team. And like, it's just hard to do that in home care. So we've got some agencies that we've worked with that have found some really great ways to build a culture that attracts amazing caregivers and retains those caregivers that you got through Indeed or referrals or whatever other channels that you get caregivers through in the first place. So there's three things that I've seen home care owners do the best. Some of them use our service. I have also talked to people who say, my retention's at 94%. I'm losing, a tiny handful of caregivers on a yearly basis. We like what you guys are doing, but we don't need it. And so I've seen some really common things across the board for folks who have a culture that keeps caregivers around. And the first one is a long time ago, or maybe never, they stopped rewarding for the big, shiny, heroic acts that save the day in a home care agency. Or if they don't stop rewarding for those things, sometimes you still have to. They de-emphasize how much their rewards program supports hero activity. And what I mean by hero activity is you had a last minute call out and you've got to find somebody to go take this shift. And the client is waiting. You've already maybe had to set expectations around like, hey, we're going to be there, but it might be a little bit late. I know owners who have had to go like work caregiving shifts themselves early into the business because they couldn't get it filled any other way and they had to take care of that client. But what happens so often is you end up going through your Rolodex of caregivers who are likely to pick up that shift, and you have to kind of like negotiate with caregivers and say, hey, for would you for like $20 go pick up this shift? Some people do it as like an increase in the hourly rate, which is like kind of cumbersome manually to do within the payroll system. I've talked to agencies who are spending as much as $100 to get a shift covered at the last minute, and that creates kind of a monster within an organization. I was talking to Julio Briones earlier this year, friend of my show, Nick. I don't know if he's a friend of your show. And one of the things that he shared was that he actually worked with an agency who found that they had some caregivers who had figured out how to game the system. And I'd say, hey, Nick, I'm about to call out. They do $50 for taking that shift. You go pick up that shift and then we'll split the $50. And so I don't know that that's happening everywhere. I do know that when you're giving out large sums of money for that kind of thing, there's totally a risk of that happening. It's an easy system to game. And it always reminds me of like the airline situation where they say, we're on a totally booked flight. We're actually overbooked and we need a few people to volunteer to change their flight plans. And in exchange, and I stopped listing at this point because I'm not going to change my plans, but it's always like, they'll be like, for $1,000 flight voucher, will you get off this plane? And I'm like, nah, it's not very much money in the grand scheme of things. They're like, for $1,500, will you please get off this plane? And they end up having to like do this weird auction where they're like trying to get people to sell their ticket back to them or whatever. And the same kind of thing happens when we're asking people to pick up shifts last minute or do other kinds of things that are like hero activity within the organization. The thing that people do that's the second thing that's really smart, and there's a lot of different ways that I've seen people execute on this well, is they shift their rewards thinking to, instead of how do I solve for a problem that's already presented itself, i.e. the last minute call out, how do I use rewards and incentives to drive the right kinds of habits that prevent me from being in that situation where I need a hero at the last minute nearly as often. And so we've got agencies that we've worked with and talked to, their last minute call outs are down like 50%. We have a customer that we were talking to and they were like, we actually had this alarm that went off every time there was a call out. And we got our call outs under control so much that we just kind of thought that the alarm broke because it stopped going off. Well, in reality, like they had changed their caregivers' behavior and habits such that they didn't need the alarm anymore. Another example is it can be, often caregivers are not super consistent clocking in and out using the mobile app, whether it's like WellSky or Access Care or whatever. And that causes like a lot of administrative burden and a lot of frustration for back office teams because the caregiver will call in and say, hey, can you clock me in? I always think about that Colby Calais song where she's like, can you count me in? And it's always like, it's like the caregiver refrain of like, hey, can you clock me in? It's like, it just is like this annoying administrative motion that happens all the time. And I was talking to an agency owner and he's like, look, in the last like 90 days, we had our clock ins at about 60% of the time our caregivers were clocking themselves in. But a lot of the times that they would call in and ask to be clocked in was when our after hours on call person was answering the phone, like the office was closed. And so their phone would ring and they'd be super stressed because they thought like, oh man, somebody's going to the hospital, somebody's fallen, like there's an emergency in the business that's going to like totally wreck my dinner or whatever. And instead it was just a caregiver asking to be clocked in through the on-call number. And so what he shared is that by aligning incentives with the little things that need to get done every day, like incentivizing clock-ins and clock-outs, that they got their clock-ins and clock-outs from 60% to like 98% over 90 days. And the ripple effects of like less administrative burden, more time for the office to like actually connect with caregivers instead of just be frustrated that they're not doing what they're supposed to do, has really changed their culture and changed the way that they're able to interact with their caregivers. And so, whether it's like, did you do like all the stuff on the care plan? Let's do some incentives if you've done that all month. A friend of mine, Jensen Jones, doesn't like the idea of caregiver of the month. He likes caregivers of the month. And so everybody who's above, has no call outs, had perfect attendance, was above like 90% timeliness. You can decide on what these criteria are for your business, who did a mentorship shift, who, whatever the kind of made a referral, whatever the things are that are like an A+ caregiver does this. everybody who fits that criteria every month gets rewarded and recognized as Caregiver of the Month, not just the one person that you're like, who haven't we recognized in a while? Oh, it's Nick. Yeah, Nick, you're Caregiver of the Month. Congrats. Instead, having this kind of like data driven, little habit forming building type of rewards program can really transform the way you work in your business and free you and your administrative team up to do all the stuff that you wish you could do if you had unlimited time.
I think that element is so impactful because I talk about Caregiver of the Month all the time and leveraging and utilizing that from like a social media
Yeah.
perspective. But I love the idea that's more data driven, not just, oh, hey, we've got this, we need it real quick with this system. It makes it easy. Hey, here's what our requirements are to get Caregiver of the Month, and this is what it is. And so just the amount of saving time to be able to give that recognition, I think is amazing. So
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that's really important from like a culture building perspective, because I totally agree with you. This is like an amazing social media moment and opportunity. And we see a lot of people leverage this as a great way to megaphone to their community, whether it's referral sources or potential applicants or clients or whatever. I think everybody in the ecosystem would love to work with a caregiver first home care agency. But the other thing that it does from a culture building perspective is if you can build transparency around your rewards process and it doesn't just feel like favoritism, it's a huge opportunity to create trust and credibility with your caregivers and for it to be predictable and for them to know what to expect when they work with an organization. And so, like, if you say, hey, the rules are this, and this gets you to Caregiver of the Month status, and then you follow through on that, it's a really great opportunity to build trust and credibility with your caregivers.
not to mention, you're just teaching people what it is to be a good
Yeah.
employee. This is something that I've talked about where, you know, people are always wondering, why don't they do this thing? It's like, well, not everyone was raised that this is how things are meant to be done, that you're supposed to show up on time and these types of things. And so when you give them clear objectives of like, hey, here are the things that you need to do that are going to get you rewards, payment, raises, all of these things, it gives a very clear, okay, this is what I need to do so that the ones that want to take advantage will, and the ones that maybe aren't going to be wondering why they're not getting the things that they, desire.
And I talk to people all the time, and a really common objection or kind of like reluctance about going all in on rewarding like these little mundane day-to-day things, because none of this is exciting, right? You showed up on time, cool, like that's what you're expected to do. And so I'll often have people say, well, I don't want to create like this entitlement, like this participation trophy mindset, and I'm totally sympathetic to that. But I think like if a home care agency had all of their caregivers do the bare minimum, i.e., show up every time, clock in and out using the app, and do their documentation, this would go from being an extremely chaotic business to run to being like just kind of a marginally chaotic business to run.
I think that's a great goal to have.
Yeah.
If your business is very chaotic, marginally sounds great.
I mean, this is an insane business to be in. Everybody I talk to, everything's on fire all the time. But if only like some of the stuff could be on fire some of the time, that would be, I think for most people that I talk to, like it'd be a world of difference, because it is just a super complex business model where you're like part like sort of healthcare, but also part logistics company. Like it is a crazy unique thing to try and run. And so it's always like, I don't want to promise anybody that this is the silver bullet that's going to like totally fix your business and make it crazy easy to run. But I do know people who are in home care and who can go to the beach for 2 months out of the year and their business doesn't catch on fire while they're gone. And so these kind of systems can be built that allow you to work on the business and not in the business, or to like go on vacation and not stress while you're gone.
Amazing. This is so awesome. And I know you touched on this already a little bit around just the importance of being able to track these things. And knowing your numbers is important in all elements of the business. But what I love is, the things that you've shared, these are numbers that are tracked and done automatically when you use a proper system like ZingGage.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit more about how the numbers are tracked and how that can be really effective in this retention process and really knowing your numbers?
The things that I've seen home care owners do with their data and their visibility into what's going on with their caregivers has really been an amazing way to build culture. And so, like, like I just talked about, this idea of caregivers of the month that's very like metrics driven and oriented, a really great way to build culture and build really predictable rewards and recognition into your business. Um, but there's a couple of other times where um, agencies that are building great culture pay a lot of attention to specific caregivers. And these are what I call like trigger based kind of workflows or rewards or whatever. So, a couple examples of this. The first one is like um, every single caregiver who gets placed with a new client should get a follow up asking how that first visit went, because we know how important client caregiver fit is. And if that fit is good, you're likely to keep that caregiver and keep them happy for a long time. But if the fit's bad and they don't tell you, because often like caregivers aren't trained, aren't like empowered to like say, hey, this thing's not going well, they'll just kind of leave and go work somewhere else. And so uh, every agency knows like, hey, caregiver-client fit's important. Probably should talk to those people, but it can be really hard to execute on consistently because there's so many other things happening in the business. And so we have customers who are automatically every single week talking to every caregiver through like a survey check-in on that first visit. And then any kind of concerning answers will like escalate that and prompt somebody from the office to call and follow up and figure out what's going on. Another thing that we've seen people do that's really effective in getting folks who are kind of on the fence to become all-in employees of the business is to understand it's this idea, and I didn't come up with this. This is another home care CEO forum kind of move, is the paycheck schedule match. I'm probably using the wrong language there, but the idea is instead of asking somebody how many hours they want to work, it's to ask them like, hey, how much money do you need in your paycheck? And does your schedule support the amount that you've told us you need to make in order to make your life make sense? And if you have that data from the beginning, right, in some kind of onboarding survey or something, and you're constantly comparing, okay, how much money do they need? That means we know how many hours they need on their schedule to how many hours are they actually scheduled. That's a huge opportunity to realize where the gaps are and fill in those gaps. And those folks who aren't getting enough hours, the conversation with them when it's time to pick up a shift, whether it's a temporary shift, like a one-time thing, or it's a permanent shift, like, hey, here's this new schedule. You can say, hey, I saw that, Nick. I saw that you need 35 hours in order to make what you told us you need to make. You're currently at 27. We've got this extra case that you could take on, and it's within your availability that you shared with us. Again, that's something else you got to keep up to date. But it's within your availability that you shared with us. Could you take on this, this case in particular? And having that kind of caregiver centric scheduling conversation is a really easy way to get people to pick up additional shifts over and against the other thing where you feel like they're doing you a big favor. But instead, this is a partnership of like, hey, you're trusting us to help you make ends meet and pay all your bills and stuff. We want to make sure we're doing a good job of that. Here's how we think we can accomplish that. Does this work for you? Is a much different conversation about scheduling than the typical kind of like, hey, we've got this last minute shift, can you pick it up? And so in all that stuff, like I share with people about all these kind of cool workflows that can be done. And the typical kind of response is like, yeah, all that sounds great, but like, have you ever talked to anybody who's in home care before? Like, we don't have the kind of excess time laying around to like look through our roster and see who's schedule does not quite align with how many hours they've told us to do. And the first answer to that is, yeah, this data is crazy fragmented. It's really hard to pull it all together. And it's hard to be a data-driven agency because it's so hard to pull this stuff together. But the second piece of that is like, this is home care. Like, welcome to home care. It's kind of the way it is. And what we've seen people do is they've used our system to be able to replace this insane pivot table that they've created for themselves and automate a whole bunch of this tracking to where they have like 2 clicks and they can see everybody who's not working enough based on what they said they need in order to make their life make sense. They're able to do like 2 clicks and they're able to see everybody who's got birthdays or work anniversaries coming up in the current week. And so it's all these kind of trigger-based outreaches that are either like a signal for manual outreach. Hey, Nick, somebody said their first visit with Mrs. Smith didn't go so good. You need to reach out to them. Or they are like totally automated processes of like, hey, notice that you were scheduled for less than 25 hours. Do you want more work? Okay, cool. Give us your updated availability. Great, thanks. And then we dump that into a group so that the next time you've got a shift that you need to assign, that's where you can go first.
Amazing. I love that. I think it's so important in at the end of the day, it's sales in getting a caregiver to fill a shift, the information that you have of them to then help them to basically get converted into picking up that shift is just it just makes sense that that works.
I'm very I'm very why you, why now oriented in my messaging. And a lot of that comes from my time is like in sales. It's like, I'm not just like pitching this to just anybody. It's like, no, the reason we're talking is you shared this, that, and the other thing. And I think we can help in these kinds of ways. And that bleeds over into the ways that I think about like the kind of workflows that we work with on our customers. It's like, you don't need to do just this crazy blast to all of your caregivers and say, can anybody out there help us? It's instead like if you can say, hey, Nick, the reason I'm reaching out is you shared blah blah blah, I have this thing, would that be a fit for you? Whether that's a scheduling thing or like there's this case that's nearby you geographically that's a good fit. Whether it's like, hey, we've got this mentorship shift and you've been with us for over 6 months now, and so we'd love to have you kind of shadow newer caregivers and make sure that they feel really confident in their first couple of weeks on the job. Those kinds of like trigger based outreach opportunities are so much more effective in terms of messaging than just kind of the like email blast to everybody.
Amazing. Excellent. So how can uh Zingage one help with all of these things, and then what can someone do if they want to learn more about how they can, implement these reward system and learn more about what you guys do?
The reason that we exist at Zingage is because we know how hard it is to recruit and retain great caregivers and to manage the business. Um, the people that I talk to are crazy passionate about home care. And it feels like so many people are constantly fighting this battle with burnout. And the reason our company exists is because my CEO saw people close to him lose the battle with burnout and just go back to what they were doing before they got into home care. And the mission was to make it so that running this business was easy enough that people didn't get lost along the way to burnout. So we know it's crazy hard to run a home care business at times, sometimes all the time. And so the reason that we exist is to solve for retention and recruitment challenges, but also to make call outs and missed clock ins and missing documentation a thing of the past. And the way that we're doing that today is we're making it way less of a problem than it needs to be. We're constantly growing, we're constantly changing stuff in our product to make it way better for our customers. Our best customers have told us, hey, we love this, but it's missing this. Can you fix that? And we love to be able to turn those things around and make the product a whole lot better for them. If somebody is thinking about how to make rewards something that builds culture, that wants to really focus on engagement of their caregivers to get more folks past the 90-day mark and to get them to do the compliance tasks that have to get done for the business to run, they can go to our website. It's ZingGage.com. They can also just email me or text me or whatever. I'm easy to get a hold of. My email is david@zingage.com. They can text me at 731-202-2776. I love talking to home care owners. Almost everybody in this business has such good energy, and they continue to be really passionate about a business that can be really hard to run, but is so important to providing like dignity and enhanced quality of life to folks who are really vulnerable and are often forgotten by kind of big healthcare and the kind of governmental programs that often leave those kinds of folks behind.
Amazing. Thank you, David. So much value, so much to take and run with it. I highly recommend you guys get in touch with David, start leveraging and utilizing this great tool so you can retain more caregivers. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you soon.